Welcome to Human Rights Education Now, a podcast series from Human Rights Educators USA. I'm your host, Bill Fernekes, a member of the National Steering Committee of HRE USA, a collaborative network to learn, teach, organize, advocate, and innovate for human rights education in the United States. This podcast aims to raise awareness about human rights education and invites listeners to engage with the worldwide movement to make human rights education a core focus of educational programs from preschool through higher education and in both non-formal and informal community educational settings. For this episode and the next one, I am joined as moderator by Eva Jane Kreutziger, a student at Columbia University and an intern with Human Rights Educators USA. Today's program is a conversation with Feliece Yeban, professor on the Faculty of Behavioral and Social Sciences at Philippine Normal University, and a longtime human rights educator and scholar. In this episode, Feliece discusses the origins of her interest in human rights and human rights education, the challenges she has encountered in pursuing her work as a human rights educator in the Philippines, the progress and areas for ongoing struggle in her work advancing human rights education in Asia, the ways in which she sustains her commitment to human rights education, particularly when the work becomes isolating, the types of pedagogical reforms needed to advance HRE as a form of developing critical consciousness among students, and the importance of helping state actors, such as the police, to abandon their focus on militarization and adopt a civilian-centered approach to their work. Well, it's a great pleasure to be able to speak today with Feliece Yeban, and I'm joined today for this podcast by Eva Jane Kreutziger, who is working this summer as an intern for Human Rights Educators USA as an Edmonds Fellow. How are you today, Feliece?
Oh, it's good. It's 8 in the evening in the Philippines. I just got home from a workshop, but everything is fine.
That's great. Okay, so I want to begin by asking you about how you first became interested in human rights issues and subsequently in human rights education.
Well, I was a young lecturer in early 1990s, and one of my students invited me to attend a human rights workshop organized by Amnesty International. And I was not, I think, I was not sort of happy with how it went. And so I volunteered for Amnesty to help them develop their human rights education program, which at the time was something very new. They just got some form of a grant from AI Norway for Operation A Day's Work, and they call it Education for Freedom in the Philippines. So that's how I got interested in human rights or involved in human rights education with Amnesty International Philippines. Yeah.
Now, going back to when that began, what were some of the sort of challenges you might have faced at that early stage?
Well, I started schooling when martial law was declared, and I completed my college education after a year after the EDSA Revolution, the People Power Revolution. And so there was what you call a democratic space or democratic dividend. At the time, we call it that. And so we were, from years or decades of authoritarian rule, we have this newfound democratic space. And so there were a lot of human rights issues that arose. I mean, during the authoritarian period, the press was controlled by the state. And so when after People Power Revolution, we got to know more about human rights concerns. And so as we call it martial law babies. So I was a martial law baby. because I started my entire education during this period. And so if you could just imagine the total control by the state of our education, and then suddenly, little by little, I got to know truths or truths behind what was happening in the Philippines during the martial law period. And so it was more of a cognitive dissonance that I experienced. And at that time as well, I was writing my thesis. And so I was reading a lot, and I discovered Paulo Freire and Antonio Gramsci. So you could just imagine how powerful their messages were. During that time that I was gradually reimagining the way I saw um, Marcos administration, the way I saw what knowledge was, the entire country. So that's how I got interested in human rights issue because of, I would say, false consciousness that I had because of the kind of education that was totally controlled by the government. Yeah.
Can
From
you,
1970 to
yeah,
1986, yeah.
yeah, can you elaborate a bit more on the role of the United States? Because being a former colony of the United States, um, there was a close relationship between United States policy and the Marcos government. How do you view that in terms of a human rights perspective?
Oh, before I became a human rights advocate, I was not aware of how the United States was actually a complicit in the with the Marcos administration. But when I started studying more, reading more, because we now have sort of free education, free press, so there were a lot of books and articles that suddenly I had access to, discussing the other side of the relationship between the Marcos administration and the U.S. We were taught, the United States was perceived very highly and was taught very positively in Philippine schools. Okay, in Philippine schools, because there was this strong relationship between Marcos and the U.S. The U.S. supported the Marcos administration, so you could just imagine the justification, justification that had to happen for the martial law period to persist that long. And so when I started educating myself, liberating myself from the controlled education that I had. So I got to really see that the US was complicit. And to think that um, at the time, well, in the history of the US, democracy is a primary value that you have. And so there's a lot of disconnect there between democratic values that the US espoused to the world and the support that it gave to an authoritarian regime. That was the Marcos regime, the Marcos senior regime.
So, you've had a lot of experiences in the private and public sectors, and in both areas, you've been a real champion of human rights education. When you think about those experiences, what are some of the challenges that have been the most daunting or most difficult for you?
In the public sector, as a university faculty, I think sexual harassment is like an open secret in Philippine universities. So when it comes to gender issues, that's really a difficult thing because you are not dealing with the state, but dealing with colleagues who are abusive, right? And that's pretty difficult. Now in the private sector, when I joined the mining company in an ancestral domain, it really is an interplay of in an area where the state was almost absent, and we had just the mining company that served as a surrogate state. And so I was there. It was more of a it was more of an experiment on my part. And so I realized that we could not separate human rights and development work, because you have an ancestral domain where indigenous people lived, and you have a mining company that has all the legal papers or legal legitimacy to mine, and you have the state that had nothing to do with the ancestral domain. I mean, it's absent. And so you just have to deal with on one side the community, and on the other side the mining company. And so, as a human rights advocate, how do you deal with that? So it really is an issue of lack of development, but at the same time, it also is an issue of development aggression. So it's a very conflicted position that I had. So that's when the state is not present, you don't know who your enemy is in a way. Right? So that's difficult. Yeah.
Now, Jeff Plantilla, before we go on to Ava, I'd say Jeff Plantilla and I spoke last week, and he mentioned a very interesting issue about reaching out to indigenous communities and understanding the values and also the priorities of those communities for human rights education. Do you agree with that?
I beg your pardon, what did he say?
He was saying that in order to really advance human rights education, you have to have a community-based approach. In other words, you have to understand the communities you're working with before you can, for lack of a better term, have them understand like an international framework or things of that sort. Do you agree with that?
No. Well, I do not agree in the sense that you have to have a formal education as well, because it has multiplier effect. And after EDSA revolution, we had easy access to communities. But during the time of former President Duterte, where he red tagged community-based efforts, NGOs had difficult time accessing communities. And so that is why the sort of human rights education stopped in a way, because the community was not anymore accommodating and hospitable to those who are engaging them in human rights. So that's difficult. Okay, so how do you do? And in the digital age, you have to optimize the role of social media and other platforms in conversing about human rights. So you have to have diverse approaches. Okay, you cannot just have a one approach in dealing with or in educating for human rights. So so it really is a whole of society approach, I would say. There are different levels, and sometimes it really depends on who your audience is. I believe that you have to have different audiences. Even the abusers, even the perpetrators, even the state actors, you have to deal with them as well. Otherwise, the conversation will not happen.
Ava, why don't you proceed? Oh, go ahead.
Hi.
You want to finish? You want to finish, Feliece?
Yeah, I'm just saying that there is a time for confrontation and there is time for conversation. That's why you have to have diverse approaches in doing human rights education work. Different levels, different realities.
Yeah, the way you phrased that was so beautiful. It's so nice to meet you. So I wanted to ask you, outline the many personal, intellectual, and emotional demands placed on transformative human rights educators, including the risk of isolation and the need for ongoing reflection. What sustains you in this work, and what advice would you give to aspiring educators who are just beginning to grapple with the depth and difficulty of this path?
You can't do this work from a position of comfort, right? It is the discomfort that kept me going. Yeah. And you have to be comfortable with the discomfort to really do the work. It makes you stronger. It makes you more creative. It challenges the way you think. But if you do it from a position, you have to have a skin in the game. Otherwise, you will just approach it in a very routinary way, just delivering the standards and all that. But if human rights violation has its own epistemic privilege, I would say. Like, you have to experience it as well, and you have to experience it with those who really experience violations the most.
And was there a point in your career where you felt like you were finally able to accept and sit with this discomfort, or would you say that was a gradual process for you?
If you're young, when I was young, I was not really conscious of the danger. As I grow older, all the more that I become conscious of the danger. But because I was, I would say, fearless when I was younger, I acquired certain skills to, in a way, to protect myself and to be more strategic as I grow older, dealing with more sophisticated forms of violations, because it can be violation can be systemic, right? How you deal with it every day, or it can be just upfront. That's the abuse is there, the physical abuse is there. So you acquire different strategies depending on what's in front of you.
Yeah. You also reference Gramsci's idea of false consciousness and Freire's critique of the banking system of education. So, given the current state of the Philippine education system, what specific reforms or pedagogical shifts do you believe are most urgently needed to counteract these legacies and promote critical consciousness among both educators and students?
Well, Gramsci is more like the idea of hegemony, that power is not always coercive. It can be ideological, right? And there is an ongoing reform in Philippine education now. And you have the state, the legislators trying to legislate the curriculum, influencing the school from their point of view. They want the curriculum to prepare Filipinos for the world of work. And to me, the curriculum is a no-no for the politicians. Let the educators discuss the curriculum, and they have to respect academic freedom. It's enshrined in our constitution. So Gramsci's idea of hegemony is at play here, because you now see how the state, with Congress, conducting review of the curriculum and identifying supposed bills that would address what they identify as ills or problems in Philippine education. I'm in a way uncomfortable with that, because there is also a danger of what Gramsci has been said in his work, that hegemony, the elite. And in the Philippines, there is marriage of political and economic elite. You have the Senate of the Philippines. You have a mother, a daughter, and a son. Now the mother is out. And you have brothers, like only 4 families out of the 24 members of the Senate. So that's That's a concern. And you have members of Congress where the political dynasties rule. So if you have these people legislating what should be taught in school, how they impact Philippine education, I'm pretty sure that Gramsci is like a reminder. See, that's gonna happen. And then you have Paulo Freire. It's a very central, unlike in the US, you're in a way you're decentralized. Imagine the policies that are educational policies done from Manila, the central office, and you have like more than 7,000 islands in the Philippines being governed from the central office. How do you contextualize knowledge? Like when I was doing my work in a mining company, it's like it's indigenous group, and they study in world history Tiglat-Pileser, Nebuchadnezzar. Why? Why? Right? They do not study their own history. So because it is the national standard. See, nation building is also about nation forgetting, right? So we are building the country, but in the process of building the country, uh, inevitably we are also making them forget their local culture and all that. So education is cannot be liberating if what is taught in school is alienating the students from their own communities. So we educate them enough to leave their community, and to me that's a problem. And human rights education helps me see that.
Yeah, you mentioned the importance of viewing even the oppressors as victims of dehumanizing systems. I found that particularly interesting when reading your work. So how do you navigate the ethical tensions in creating meaningful dialogue with those who have caused harm, like state actors?
Yeah, that's I had I think it was 3 years. I did a training, human rights training for the chiefs of police of the entire country. So, and we discovered how that this was in the 1990s, late 1990s. Okay, so that was the work that I did. And the direction was to civilianize our police force, and most of those who participated in our training were young police officers during the time of martial law. So kind of that is why I realized na oops, as they did what they said they did, they were dehumanized as well, and they discussed with us how they were systematically the violation was systematic, that they were asked to do the body count, and they had to chop off the ear, left ear I think, or right ear, I forgot already. So that's how they count the dead bodies. Okay, that they so anyway, and they suffered. They said that many of their colleagues who were involved during the martial law period became addicts, became suffered from mental illness, because they too didn't like what they were asked to do, but they had to do it. And it was a very painful experience for us trainers as well, because the way they were trained, because we also studied the way they were trained, it was systematic. They had to be dehumanized. They had to undergo hazing, physical abuse, before they become police officers, because they have to be toughened up. No, they have to be tough. So that's how the system made them be oppressors, and they just wanted to be acknowledged that they are human beings as well. So that's without okay, I'm saying this without um how would I say, they still have to be, they are still accountable for what they did.
Yeah.
But right, but I recognize that it is the system that made them such. For instance, we expect them to do human rights based policing, or their rules of engagement have to be aligned with human rights. But they say, how can we, for instance, how can we practice? We don't have bullets. We have to um, pay for our bullets ourselves. We have to train we don't have enough training. So even in forensic, even in police work, so it's very traditional. So those things, that is why when we do human rights education, it really is a whole of government approach for government to be able to really do their work as duty bearers of human rights.
Wow. You mentioned the word that you were called to civilianize these state actors. Could you tell me a bit more about what that process was like?
Um, because this was in the late 1990s, during martial law period, the military and the police were somehow merged. So the work of the military is different from the work of the police. But during the martial law period, it's like like integrated. Okay, it's integrated. So they had ranks of a military. They had military ranks like their captain, major, general. So part of the civilianization was to change their mindset, change their ranks, to instead of captain or major military ranks, they are called inspector, chief inspector, superintendent. And so we start with that. And then their curriculum. We reviewed their curriculum and we infused human rights-based policing and a lot of psychology and sociological or social science component in their curriculum. Okay, so because in their old curriculum, it was more really protecting the state, and that is not a police work, really. So in their mind, there really is a mix up of the military, the role of the military, and the role of the police. And so with civilianization, it's clarified what police work is and what military work is, and this is the requirement for them as police officers. So that's how civilianization was implemented at the time. But now they reverted back to military ranks. They're now general again, and major, and this was I don't know when it started, but we had President Duterte. It was a different kind of administration. We're reminded of the authoritarian regime, of course.
Thanks for listening to Human Rights Education Now. Our next episode concludes our conversation with Feliece Yeban, professor on the Faculty of Behavioral and Social Sciences at Philippine Normal University. You can find additional information about this podcast series at www.hreusa.org. Each episode is available on the HREUSA podcast page, Spotify, Apple Podcasts, YouTube, Pocket Casts, Player FM, and Deezer. You can also download each episode as an MP3 file. If you have questions or comments about this podcast, send them to Kristi, that's KRISTI, at HREUSA.org. Our podcast team includes producer and editor Bill Fernekes, executive producer Kristi Redelius Palmer, editor Elizabeth Schwab, sound designer and project manager Sabrina Sanchez, communications and public outreach coordinator Tia Hins, and production coordinator Jasmine Chizu Gota. Human Rights Education Now is a production of Human Rights Educators USA, a project of the Center for Transformative Action in Ithaca, New York.